Okay, Tony, whenever you're ready.
Okay. It is now 6:02, and this is the October 17th Town of Hideout Planning Commission meeting being called to order. First thing we'll do is roll call. Glynis and Peter are excused. And we have Rachel,
Here.
Joel,
Here.
Donna, Chase, and Tony's here. Okay. That being done, does anybody have any questions in regard to the minutes that were distributed from last month's meeting? Okay, there being no questions, would somebody like to make a motion to accept them?
I move that we accept the minutes of September 19th.
I'll second
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll take a vote. Joel,
Yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
and Tony's a yes. Therefore, we meet as distributed. The September 19th meeting minutes will be accepted. Okay, on to the first item on the agenda. We're going to go a little bit out of order. And first thing we're going to consider is item number 2. Consideration and possible recommendation to the Hideout Town Council regarding a proposal for the lot combination in Soaring Hawk subdivision lots 65 and 66. Thomas, do you want to take us through that real quick?
Yes, I will do that right now.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Chase is on now.
Thank you.
Where are we? Not that one. It is that one. Sorry, I'm not driving very well tonight.
Yeah, you're fine. There you go. I'll let you pull that up. But yeah, as you're pulling that up, this is for a lot combination. It's for lots 65 and 66 in Soaring Hawk. Each of the lots is about a quarter of an acre. Lot 65 is 0.25 acres. Lot 66 is 0.22. So the total size of the newly created lot would be just under half an acre. This area is zoned resort specially planned area within a resort village high density pod, which doesn't necessarily fit what was built there. As a result, there really are no required setbacks pursuant to the zoning. However, per the plat, there are 6-foot public utility easements that run along all property lines, essentially for development in this area, which is under the Master MDA. Setbacks are generally determined by the HOA Design Review Committee. Maximum height allows for up to 8 stories because it is under a high density pod, but the houses built in that area are typically in compliance with our RSF, our residential single family zoning district, which would be 35 feet. And that is likely what the HOA Design Review Committee would allow in this district. It's worth noting there is no development on either one of these lots. The applicant is proposing to combine them and build a single unit. If you scroll down a little further, you can see that arrow is just a little bit off. It looks like it got moved when it got PDF'd. If Alicia, I'm not sure if I have the opportunity to annotate. If there is a way to do that, I would love that. But where you see the bottom of that arrow, push it up to the 2 lots above it. Those are the 2 lots that are being combined. Those 2 right there. Thank you. So it's essentially on a corner. If you scroll down a little bit, we've got a bit of some recommendations for a lot combination. It is worth noting there's no maximum lot size permitted in the R-SPA zoning district. And so this does meet all of the area and bulk conditions. We recommend the following conditions: that the maximum house size can be increased to 125% of that which is allowed on lot 65, which is the slightly larger lot. That is a limitation by the master HOA. That is not an ordinance limitation, but it's worth including that as a plat note because it is a master HOA limitation pursuant to the design guidelines for the HOA. There, as we noted, there really are no setbacks. Our recommendation would be that we at least provide minimum setbacks of 20 for the front, 15 for the sides, and 20 for the rear yard. Again, the HOA DRC can go more restrictive than that, but at least we should incorporate a building envelope that respects those recommended setbacks. We would also recommend that the curb cut for this property be moved as far away from the intersection as possible. It doesn't matter which side of the lot, but we would recommend that it be moved as far back as possible, just from a safety perspective. No additional parking pads for storage would be allowed on the lot other than what is allowed on a single family lot. No additional accessory structures other than what's allowed pursuant to the ordinance, and noting that the applicant must adhere to the requirements of the HOA, the master HOA, including the DRC, the Design Review Committee requirements, and that existing topography and native vegetation must remain undisturbed except for that area designated within the limits of disturbance fence. And it is important that the line to be removed, actually, if you could go down maybe one more page, you could see the image. That might make this one a little bit easier to understand. So yeah, you see that line there to be removed right in the center. It's kind of that dotted line. That right now, again, does have a 6-foot utility easement on one side, a 6-foot on the other. It is incumbent upon the applicant to make sure that there are no utility lines that actually run down that utility easement. As long as there are no utility lines that run down that utility easement can be removed. That would be done in conjunction with the town engineer. But other than that, staff is supportive of the lot combination.
Alice, I just have a couple questions.
Sure.
Sorry. So is that the pie shape? Is that a different zoning, did you say? Is that zone different than the other lots?
No, everything up in Soaring Hawk is zoned R Spa Resort Specially Planned Area, and it has a density pod overlaid, which is a high density pod. It doesn't make sense sometimes. Some of the density pods in the master MDA didn't apply as well as they should have with regard to what was built on the ground.
And then Thomas, we're gonna recommend that it, or put in that the curb cut is either all the way to the right, basically of the property, or to the left, or preferably to the right as you're looking at the drawing.
Probably, yeah, if you're
That's
looking at it,
furthest away from the corner.
right, just from a safety perspective, and I'm sure that is exactly what the any applicant would want to do, just to protect themselves for easy ingress egress to the lot.
So you mentioned the square footage requirements. Can you tell us what the square footage will be or could be? What's the max?
I'd have to go and look at lot 65. I don't know. Is the applicant here? Do you know? Is the applicant?
Yeah, I'm here. I think the max on any one lot is 3,600 square feet. So I think that would put it at 4,500 because 25% of 3,600 is 900.
That seems about right. I could go back and look at the HOA each lot description, but I think that sounds about right. So Rachel, keep in mind that would be the footprint. They could, of course, if it was 4,500, they could have a second story on there. But that would be the building footprint maximum allowance.
Also, if you don't mind, just so I make sure I was clear on your discussion of the driveway, if we're facing the two lots, we're either looking all the way to the left or to the right. And I think logically for us, it's to the right. To the left, there's power and a fire hydrant. And then you obviously have at the corner, there's sewer lines and other stuff. So from our point of view, to the right, which is lot 65, would make the most sense.
You're in regard to the curb cut, right?
Yeah,
So I think what you're saying, Jeremy, is it would be kind of to the top of this drawing, right? I think.
No,
no, opposite side there. Yeah.
Okay, just to be clear, that's fine.
Do any of the other, any of the commissioners have any other questions for Thomas or the petitioner? Okay, there being none then, seeing that this is on for a public hearing, is there anyone from the public that's either there or online that would like to make a comment? Okay, there being no response, we'll close the public comment for this. And then, would someone from the commission like to make a motion?
I move that we have to make a positive recommendation on this, correct?
We don't have to.
Positive or negative?
Yeah.
We have to make a
You just
recommendation.
have
we have to make a
You have,
recommendation.
you should make a
Okay.
recommendation, yes.
And then it goes to council,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
That's correct. You'll
I
make a,
move-
yeah.
I move that we make a positive recommendation, approving lots 65 and 66 be combined. Am I saying that right, Thomas?
Yes, it sounds as if you're proposing favorably to approve,
Yes.
favorably recommend lot 65 and 66 combination.
Combination, yes,
With the recommended setbacks?
with the recommended setbacks
And other conditions.
and other conditions.
Would anybody like to second that?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Chase. All right, we'll take a vote. Rachel?
Yes,
Tony is a yes. Joel?
Yes,
Chase?
Yes.
Therefore, we'll give a positive recommendation to the town council for the combination of the two lots. Good luck, sir, with the town council.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, Tony, I was a little late coming to the party.
That's okay, Donna. Now we are number one. We'll start from the top now. Discussion and possible recommendation to the Hideout Town Council of an ordinance regarding the updates to the subdivision procedures pursuant to the new Senate bill and House bill. Okay. Do we have anybody here who, either online or in person, who was going to take us through this? I thought someone was going to
Tony, I
come.
think that Jay Springer is available to walk us through this, and he is on Zoom.
Okay, great. Jay, if you wouldn't mind explaining this in English to us?
Yeah. So my name's Jay Springer. I am an attorney at Smith Hartwigson. And I am working under a contract with the Department of Workforce Services that is funding this. The short version is 2023, the legislature introduced an entirely new subdivision procedure that all municipalities have to follow. In 2024, they updated that. And for towns like Hideout that are smaller, it kind of eased up some of the restrictions and timelines to make it a little bit more palatable. And then, towards the end of 2023, they actually released funding in a technical assistance fund that qualified vendors like myself have been able to use to help towns. So what we've done so far, and we handle all the administration. When Jan reached out to us, we went through the administrative process. I then did a brief presentation to the council, outlining kind of the requirements, and presented one of the items that I believe is in your packet, which is the questionnaire. What we've tried to do in this process is give the town as much decision-making power as we can within the parameters of what has to be done by the state to comply with that code. So we do have to have this done by the end of the year, December 31st, 2024. And basically looking through the code and how it affects Hideout, I'm not really going to, well, let me back up just a second. So a lot of this is procedural. It is not dictating zoning. It doesn't affect any of that. It does give applicants certain rights once they're in the application process. It also makes some requirements non-negotiable, and there are some things that the town can no longer require. But as long as the town staff is aware of the potential pitfalls, and we've been working together to make sure they understand that, most of the risk is really not an issue. The biggest one being during the review procedures, the town does have to identify all potential deficiencies in an application. If it doesn't, and it signs off and says, hey, here's our round of comments, and the town misses something when they send it back, that is waived within certain requirements in the town. So it actually creates an incentive for the town to be very thorough rather than and doing anything flying off the cuff. So in a lot of ways, that this is a good thing because developments from both sides are a little bit more intentional and not kind of Wild West. So and then what we've done so far in the procedure is after the council presentation, I worked with Polly and Alicia and a little bit with Thomas. We'll do a little bit more, I think, as well, to come up with the red lines. I didn't provide clean versions at this stage because really we are talking about the changes. So there are minor changes in several of these titles, and some of them we've determined that there won't be any changes in. So Title 3 is just identifying the Planning Commission's roles and authorities, and also some of the administrative law judge clarifications that are dictated. Titles 8 and 9, we noticed it, anticipating there might be some changes. Ultimately, there were not. The bulk of the changes are in 10 and 11. And then we're looking at, I think 13 was also one that we did not need to make any changes in. And then 12, the zoning, depending on some of the outcome and final review, we might need to just make Title 13 consistent, or Title 12 consistent with some of the changes in Title 11. So they're also going through this. You'll see a lot more, marks on the left side from the track changes than are anything that we really need to be worried about. So I just, as going through it, I did some cleanup as I was reviewing it. I deleted sections in the red line that are not being changed or are not relevant. So some of the sections that are left in here are not. I'm not recommending any changes, but they're there for context as they relate to other changes that are being recommended. So I don't know if you want to go through individual changes, if you would just want to talk about the process a little bit more, or how you want to handle any of the information that we have.
Jay, maybe if, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind if I just jump in real quickly, it might be helpful.
My guess, Thomas.
If you could kind of just explain the different role for the planning commission, and I think, Alicia, that might really be on PDF page 10, kind of up at the beginning, just that in the past where the planning commission has been the review body for preliminary and final, it's changed as a result of the state statute, right? That it's really only a preliminary review, and they reject, accept, add conditions, and then it goes to final review, which is more of a through the administrator, I suppose, is how it's worked, or the planner.
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Thomas. And we did update it and correct it to be planner for final. That was working with Polly. So one of the fundamental changes in SB 174 was removing the council from all individual subdivision applications for single family, two family, and townhomes. So for consistency's sake, most of the time we're looking at the same procedure, regardless of the type of subdivision, just because that makes it easier for staff to follow the same procedure. The technical requirement from the state is really for those residential, those single family, two family, and townhomes. But so in doing so, it really focused the council's role as the policy setters, and the planning commission is limited to preliminary review. So that is, but what we determine is required for preliminary is up to the town. And with Polly's guidance, we front loaded the application very heavily. So it's basically, it's reverse from most communities, but there are specific concerns that we understand for Hideout, where we really want to have a fully developed plan at preliminary that the planning commission gets to see. And then final is, when you're at this point with this structure, it's going to be final check, but you cannot, with this structure, be making changes to the plans, because the subdivision improvement plans, which are the civil drawings, have to be approved during one phase only. So if we're requiring them in preliminary, that's going to be done during preliminary. And then at the end, really, it's just confirming they're ready for Mylar printing and signatures. So the other thing that affects the planning commission is you can have a public hearing as you have in the past, but you can only have one, which means you can continue a decision item for a subdivision, but not the public hearing. So if you have a complex issue that you can't make a decision on the same date that you have the public hearing, you really only have two options. One is to not hold the public hearing as scheduled and reschedule it, or take the public comment at that stage and make a decision at a later meeting. So those are two of the big things that change for the planning commission. We've tried as much as possible to limit the effects to the procedures that you're used to. But that does just make it a little bit more front loaded to make sure that we're not running the risk of creating a situation where an applicant is entitled to something because of how it came down in the process. So, that's another thing that I just wanted to clarify. I am here, I'm an attorney. My job is to represent the town in this process. I'm not here for the state just because they're paying me. I want to make that clear too. So,
Jay, just to follow up on
that
helps a lot. Just to follow up on that. So if a subdivision comes into the planning commission and it is a very complex subdivision, in prior years, it may go through a number of iterations, and typically we would hold public hearings, and it could be, maybe it's 3 meetings that the planning commission is working through the project, and in conjunction with the community, in the spirit of transparency, we typically have those as public hearings. But what you're saying is the planning commission could take 3 meetings, if it's whatever the number is, a very complex application, but they can only hold one public hearing during the course of those 3 meetings?
Yes, and then we also have review timelines, so that the town does have to act within certain timeframes. And now those iterations of going back and forth are going to be, so every time you go back and forth, you're going to have a review log that is identifying the issues and pointing to them. And then the applicant is going to say, well, we think we addressed this, and here's where in our plans. It does become very granular in this process, because each side, the town and the applicant, has to identify all the aspects of the project that are not in compliance, or or if there is additional information needed. All of that needs to go back and forth every time. So you can't have a part where you're saying, okay, we're going to deal with sewer and stormwater today, and then next week we're going to talk about the culinary water. That's not something that we can do in this system. So those iterations can come back and forth, and ultimately, regardless of whether there are meetings, those clocks are running. But with setting them up as 40 business days for review cycles, that timer stops as soon as we send back comments to the applicant that follow those procedures and say, hey, here's all the things. So as long as we're within that and we don't let the clock run, we're going to be fine. But yes, it may be that you have public meetings to discuss these issues, and then you call for the public at the public hearing on the last meeting. Once you've kind of worked through those things, so that, and then any interested public can, come and comment. I don't know how it would, if you had a public comment period during the meetings that wasn't part of the public hearing. Typically, those are limited to, items not on the agenda. So there might be some issues there that Polly would help give more advice on the ground. But at this point, we're setting up the procedures. So
I have a question. So if we have to have one public comment session, is it possible can members of the community submit just comments in writing that could be reviewed
Yes.
later?
Yeah, of course. So whenever you have a public hearing, you can receive written comment.
Well, I'm saying, could that be not during the public comment? If there's only one, if they attend other meetings prior to that, are they allowed to submit?
Well, I don't think the town could tell them not to submit written comments in some form or another, but that I don't think that would be a violation of this provision if there were written comments, especially if it became part of the file. That's a little tricky, but yeah, I don't think that you're running the risk of really creating an issue at that point. I think they become part of the record. Maybe a policy that doesn't even need to be part of the ordinance is that any submitted comments become part of the record during the public hearing portion.
I'm just curious, what was the reasoning, or what is the reasoning for only one public hearing? Any idea?
So there are two issues. One is, really the legislature is trying to push that these subdivisions are administrative, which they always have been. And it puts appointed and elected officials in kind of an awkward spot where you're receiving public comment, but if they check all the boxes, they're entitled to approval. So on the one hand, it's a motivation not to give false hope in the public hearing, and also just not to allow public clamor to become an issue when it's really about an administrative approval. So the intent in limiting this, I think, in part, at least in what I've heard from the League of Cities and Towns and some of the feedback that we've gotten there, is they were hoping that fewer communities would choose to have public hearings at all when forced to make this change. But most communities have continued, if they've been having public hearings for subdivisions, they've continued to do that under this change. So I mean, there's a little bit. I think the overall goal is to give one, speed up subdivisions for developers. I don't know that this accomplished that. But two, and I think it did accomplish this, is creating more clarity in what is required for a complete subdivision application, so that somebody can come in, and if they do everything up front 100% perfect, then they're entitled to approval based on what we publish. And that is the case. If they do everything, then that's going to happen. It's just not usually how it actually happens.
That subdivision process, though, Jay, just for clarity, does the development standards requirements in terms of sensitive lands, steep slopes, all of that still applies, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And a lot of communities have used this as an opportunity to revisit those, because they, it becomes just that much more upfront. And so all those requirements, those are the things that the council needs to be making decisions about. What are the standards that we're going to require? The Planning Commission is recommending those. In Hideout specifically, those engineering standards and those things have to be recommended by the Planning Commission up to the council, or adopted by resolution by the council. So whenever we're looking at that, those are still the policy setting decisions that the council's involved in. But once we have created the boxes and they check all the boxes, the process should just allow them to go through at the administrative level.
That's helpful.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions for Jay or Thomas or anything in regard to this?
So what are next steps? Are there more revisions coming? Is this something we need to review and approve? How does that work?
Yeah, so at this point, we think we're pretty close to a final. The policy decisions and the level of detail that any changes that are forthcoming would be very technical in nature, not the policy type decisions. So what we're looking for is a recommendation to the council. At this point, if there are overarching concerns about just concepts that we want to make sure are addressed by the council, that can be appropriate to pass along. You don't have to craft language or anything like that to make a recommendation of addressing certain types of issues. There are 50 pages here, 49 pages, I think, in just the red lines. So if there are corrections or anything like that. And then I also like to just leave it open, because we'll always do another pass and catch typos. There's always one left somewhere. If you want, I can go through some of the biggest text blocks and explain them, or we can just take any questions or go through. So what works best for you?
Jay, why don't you go through the big blocks right now that are, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what you had said, I believe we're not going to vote on anything tonight. We're going to, I believe we should wait till you guys work out all the stuff that's redlined.
Okay. Yeah, so we certainly can. So let's go through. So Title 3, I'm just going to go through. I have a hard copy. The changes in Title 3 are clarifying that the Planning Commission is the administrative land use authority for preliminary applications. And then this is just from the code saying it can't be. And then the appeal on the last section on 3.0406 is about the administrative law judge. And that is calling out an appeal from subdivision improvement plan. So this is again the civil drawings portion. If it gets to the point where you're no longer going to be trying to work it out between staff and the applicant, then there's a procedure that the state enacted for addressing those, and it basically involves both sides getting an expert, and then the two experts getting a third, and then going through kind of a committee process for those disputes. But those all have to be licensed engineers. So that's not anticipated to be something that happens very often, but if it does, it just can't be handled like other appeals from, say, lot width, frontage, variances, things like that. For Title 10, so this is starting on page 3, the development standards and building permits. One of the things that is really critical to protecting the town is having some automatic expirations of vesting and entitlements. So if someone is trying to do land speculation with vesting approvals, but then they're not actually ever going to build anything, we don't want that to just be in perpetuity. So we recommended changes that several of those become automatic if development isn't done. There is for open space and public spaces, there is a change that isn't really related to the procedure, but it's part of HB 476, the 2024 legislation, that the town can no longer require private landscaping improvements. You can't withhold certificates of occupancy if they don't have their lawn in or anything like that. So public landscaping improvements is approved or is defined in the state code. And so I flagged that as, as long as it's not, I didn't see anything that we necessarily had to change other than a couple of minor things, but just flagging that because it could be something that some people feel very strongly about, and the state has taken away that power.
Jay, could I ask a quick question? Alicia, could you go back to page 12 of 79 on the PDF? So along that line, there were some, this is 100602, if you're looking at a hard copy. So landscaping and maintenance requirements, for example, there's some minor changes in here from shall to may. And so.
Yeah, and so what that is, in those cases, those should all be negatives, so may not. So that is a grammar fix, really. Shall not is ambiguous, may not is not. So that's what those changes are. So in no event, they may not exceed. That means that there can't be any excess. They may make up no less than 50%.
So the strength of the shall versus the may, the may is, in your opinion, stronger, benefiting
in the negative, yes.
Benefiting the town in this case.
Yes.
Ensuring we get the minimum standard.
Yeah, and there may be some that I've missed, but usually if you're saying shall not versus may not. May not just is a little bit less ambiguous, and it's also consistent with how the state legislature rules of interpretation are defined at the state level, which says basically the same thing. There have been cases in courts where, because the word shall is used to mean three different things in an ordinance or an agreement, courts have interpreted that in the way most favorable to a property owner rather than enforcement of the ordinance, because there's multiple ways that it can be interpreted.
Okay, so shalls to may benefit the town in this case. Pursuant to
In this case, that is my intent in all of those. Yes.
Okay.
So let's see. The rest of these changes in Title 10 until we get to Title 10.10.06. The comment here is that, so we had 10.10.04. We made that consistent with what was in Title 11 for conflicting provisions, basically just saying, we're not going to say this one is controls over this. We're going to say whichever one is more restrictive is the one that controls, which matches Title 11. And then we have the required improvements. One of the things that we're working on that isn't part of this and doesn't have to be is updating the engineering standards. And we also have to publish a list. So we have to publish what is required for the preliminary application, and we're working on updating that. So this note is really just to ensure that these requirements get posted in the right place with the rest of the requirements. So all of these are required regardless of anything else. And I'm not an engineer. I'm not recommending those changes. That's outside of my expertise, but ensuring that it gets to the right places is what I'm trying to help do. Title 11 also incorporates the definitions from Title 10. So I've included several of those definitions, added some. Most of them are just left in because I was referencing back to them as I was working through this. But some of the ones that are left in there are used in Title 11 to add some clarity there. The big change now going to Title 11 is in the authority. This is what we were just talking about with, that change is 11.02.06. The Town Planning Commission is designated as the administrative land use authority for preliminary plat applications for subdivisions. And the town planner is the next, is for final. The changes in A and B that were on the page just a moment ago are clarifying that, yes, the council has the regulatory legislative authority, but not the authority to actually take the actions on individual applications. So they're delegating that and defining how that works in the code. Transfer of land pursuant to a void plat is voidable in the discretion of the council. I added that just because if it's void, then it's automatic. If it's voidable, somebody has to do something. So I wanted to make that a council action. Because that's not related to approval of a subdivision, I think that could still remain within the discretion of the council. And then E and F defined those roles for preliminary and final, which are defined in the subdivision code. Let's see. The next big one is 11.02.22. So, yep, this is the same thing as appeals. I mentioned that already. That's the same thing. The subdivision improvement plans appeals is a defined procedure in statute. The change in the next section is just moving the definitions because it was duplicated elsewhere, so we didn't need both references, bringing in the definitions from Title 10. Let's see. 110604, the application forms, just clarifying this doesn't have to be in the ordinance, but we put it there because it is going to happen. Everything that a subdivider needs must be made publicly available. The idea is they could, without ever talking to somebody at the town, get all the information they need to fully form a subdivision application and bring it to the town. And so that is basically a requirement at this point. And so we're saying, yes, it will be made available on the town's website. So whenever those engineering standards get updated, they'll get updated on the website. And that's kind of the way to go. So, let's see. The next one is on the fire district review, 110616. So one of the things that we want to push back to the applicant whenever possible is any third party requirement. So if we require that they show that they have water, sewer, fire, all those things, we don't want that to be on the town to go find because we are on a time limit. The applicant is not. So this is kind of a question. Do we want, excuse me, do we want to require that of the applicant rather than, as it's written right now, the fire district has waived its opportunity to add any comments or requirements? Basically really saying, no, it's on the applicant to get something from the fire district for the town to look at. So with that one, do any of the commissioners have any comments on what that fire district involvement should look like?
And just so the commissioners are aware, typically when we get a subdivision, the town engineer and the town planner review it. There's some coordination back and forth with the applicant, and once the subdivision is generally in line with the ordinance, and we're getting ready to bring it to you all. We get the fire marshal to take a look at it to make sure that it meets their requirements. I think, Jay, what you're suggesting is we can essentially keep that procedure in place, or we can require the applicant to come with the fire marshal letter of support.
Yes, that's exactly it. So, because this says before the plat is approved for recording, the fire district review, the town will require that the fire district, so shall request the fire district approve the plat or provide comments and feedback.
Excuse me, I'm getting background noise on somebody's Zoom and I can't hear well. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Donna. So yes, basically this is saying if they don't provide comments, then we're saying that it's okay, but do we want to be saying that it's going to be okay, rather than saying, hey, you gotta do that?
I would say, couldn't we go through the same process and work collaboratively with the developer, but then put it on the developer to get the sign off from the fire district?
Yeah. as far as the process, that's not going to change. I don't think, Thomas, I don't think that's going to change. You're still going to work with them.
Mhm.
You just have to be careful with, in the code saying, if this is on us, then we have to do it within a time frame, and
Yeah.
we don't want to put that burden on us where they don't have the same burden.
Yeah, that's why I would say let's put that burden on them to get the sign off from the fire department.
Okay, I will rework this paragraph to account for that.
I agree.
I agree too.
Okay. The concept plan package, this is the next one on the list. This is what's called concept plan or pre-application meeting. This is something that the state code did take away. So we can no longer require applicants to have a pre-application meeting or concept plan review. What we've done in these revisions is clarify that it is optional for those subdivisions that are affected by SB 174, so the single family, two family, and townhomes. And if they do it, we have to do it within a certain, if they request it, we have to give it to them, and we have to give it to them within a certain period of time. And this outlines, a lot of this is largely just straight from the state code, what we have to do. And I also put in here subsection D, a little bit below where we're showing, is clarifying that if they submit what would be considered subdivision improvement plans before we get to that point, we're not beginning substantive review. We're just prohibiting that as a policy so that the timer doesn't start until we're ready, until they're ready, really. And they can't start the timer by having a concept plan meeting where they submit something that's really more than a concept. So that's the high level there.
But you can still require a concept plan for multifamily and commercial.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that does go to all the, when I say the state has required this, that only applies to single family, two family, and townhomes, with very limited exceptions. When I talk about development agreements, that applies more generally, but within the subdivision context for these, those are the only ones that have to. But for simplicity's sake, it makes sense usually to keep them very similar in procedure. There's a lot of clarification. I left in a lot of these things without a lot of changes, just because it's helpful to have the idea of what actually goes into a concept plan, what's required, if they choose to do that. The state code does not prevent us from clarifying and adding provisions into what that means to the town of Hideout. But I don't want the town to get in trouble by having a public hearing on a concept plan and then waiving their ability to have a public hearing later on preliminary. I think that argument could be made. That's a change that's coming up here right there. That's that change. Let's see. Quite a bit later, I'm now on page 35 of
Jay, sorry, one thing. So the concept plan, whether optional for residential or required, if we have it required for multifamily and commercial, it doesn't go to the planning commission, just goes to staff.
So that's for the optional concept plan application.
Just for the optional, okay.
Yes. So I didn't want to change anything, but that's if you want to have it more consistent across the board, if that's something that, for example, you feel like might get missed in a process, that might be something where you want to say across the board it goes to the planner instead of the planning commission, just so that there's less risk. But this was limited to the requirements that it only apply to those types of subdivisions.
So for a residential subdivision, we cannot take it, if it's for a residential subdivision, we cannot take a concept plan to the planning commission.
Not for a public hearing. So I felt in that circumstance, I think that a concept plan is a little, well, and in taking Polly's feedback, really trying to drive that the preliminary is where the magic happens. Concept plan is we could send it to the planning commission at a concept plan level. I don't know how helpful that is, but that's an option.
If we wanted to do that, we could send the concept plan to the planning commission as a work session, not as a public hearing, but it would allow the planning commission to weigh in on just the initial layout, et cetera. Would that be fair to say?
I believe so. Let's flag that and double check.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
Just like if we go back up, sorry, to F and G. It's talking about the planning commission giving guidance, so.
Right. And so I didn't want to go make those changes, but if we do want to do that, we can make that more consistent. Okay. We ready for the next section?
Sure.
Okay, so I am looking at page 34 of 49 for mine, so another 6 pages down. Okay, so this is the big meat of ensuring the subdivision improvement plans are part of preliminary, which covers the plans and the review procedures. So a lot there's basically a full page of text that we've written in here, starting at D, these timelines. So yeah, we have these business days, which is makes it pretty broad. And there's 2 things that happen when a subdivision application comes in. One is that the town needs to determine that it is a complete application. And if it is a complete application, then you need to complete what is called ordinance review. And that has to happen within 30 days. The same time, because we're requiring the subdivision improvement plans with the preliminary application, the same day starts the 40 business day timer for review of those subdivision improvement plans. So we can separate out those 2 reviews, but and have the extra 10 business days, so an extra 2 weeks for the plans after we've gone through the ordinance review. So the ordinance review is going to be lot sizes and types of development and those kinds of things, whereas the plans are going to be the granular, the engineer drawings type specificity. So this goes through that process. If they submit a complete application, then we have to respond within 30 business days. We do it in writing. We put in a timeline that if they don't submit, if we tell them that they don't have a complete application and they don't submit all the paperwork that they need to complete the application, it expires within 60 days after they receive notice. We don't have to do that. I just, don't like the idea of having applications sitting where there's question marks about what's happening. Excuse me. And then we have
just real quickly, Jay, if it expires, let's just say 60 days did transpire and it expired, are they allowed to resubmit without substantively changing it?
Yeah. Unless we expressly prohibit that. I know for some things there might be a reason to not bring it back within a period, but for just an incomplete application, that I don't think that rises to that level.
Okay.
So then 40 days. So E and F and G all go into this back and forth that's happening on the subdivision improvement plans, where the town has to respond, has to respond within the with the review log. And what I'm calling the review log is the detailed line by line identifying where the requirement is in the code, and they're identifying where in their plan they think they've satisfied it. So it can't be, this review, if we send them a 2-page letter saying, hey, you need to have X, Y, and Z pursuant to Hideout Town Code sections A, B, and C in our development standards D, E, and F, and they come, well, we did that, go back and check. Then we go back and say, no, under the law and our code, you're required to identify in detail where you believe it's been addressed with citations and things like that. So, and this, as long as we're completing those reviews and going back and forth, then we're going to be fine. But the biggest thing here is everything has to be identified in every round. If anything is left off, if we identify 10 things and they only respond to 8, then we have not finished that review cycle. They still, that doesn't start another review cycle. It doesn't restart the timer. They have to respond to us. And if they take too long, then we get more time to respond. But we have to respond to theirs within 40 or 60 business days. I did see a chat from Jan. 10-day engineering review. What I'm not sure what you mean by 10-day engineering review, Jan.
It may have been addressed at the legislative session, but I know that when it originally came out, that was the big concern of most cities. So maybe that has been revised.
Yeah, so now this is the subdivision improvement plans, is the engineering, and we're at 40 business days. That is the maximum that's allowed under state law, and that was introduced in 2024. Under the 2023 legislation, everyone, regardless of the size of the city, was capped at 20 business days. So the goal is always to get it done in less time, but we don't want to create barriers we don't want to create tripping blocks for ourselves if we don't have to. So that's what all of that wall of text is there.
So within the first 30 days, town staff has to review the preliminary subdivision. During that first 30 days, the applicant also submits an actual subdivision improvement plan, which is the civil set of drawings, the detailed granular drawings, right?
So they have, for the application to be complete, they have to submit those together.
They do, but those don't have to be reviewed within 30 days, just essentially the preliminary subdivision. Then we've got another 40 days to review the civil set? No,
you have 40 days from submission of the subdivision improvement plan. So you have 30 days of receipt of the complete application for the first pass which is not, so, I mean, really, they should be happening in tandem. We could say the town will respond to everything within 30 days, including the subdivision improvement plans, to keep it together. That's an option if that's going to be, but it is not wait 30 days and then start the 40 days. The 40 days starts at the same time as the 30.
So essentially we have 10x, a complete application includes the full civil set for a preliminary subdivision. So we essentially have to deem the application complete within 30 days with our reports, but we have an additional 10 days for the engineering civil set review.
Yeah, and determining that the application is complete should take a couple of days, and then determining that it's compliant with the ordinance outside of the plans is what is the other part that happens within the 30 days.
Okay.
So the first part is, have they submitted something that they've called subdivision improvement plans and a plat and the application form? And then, but you know, if that's part one. Part two is, did they sign the application form like they're supposed to? Did they send a picture of their dog instead of subdivision improvement plans? You know, because that now isn't a complete application. You know, so those kinds of things. The first one is just, have they checked the box? And then the second one is, have they actually checked the box? And then the third one is, let's go through line by line with the dozens or hundreds of boxes that the engineers have to check. So, does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then let's see. The next changes are, yeah. So once we have gone through all of that, if they have checked all the boxes and engineering is signed off and the planning commission as the preliminary authority has approved it, then they're entitled to preliminary approval, at which point it would be approved by the planning commission and go to the town planner for final. At this point, that's basically the end. There can be some things that happen at final, but usually if the subdivision improvement plans are handled at preliminary, there's not much to do in final. So it's going to be basically a rubber stamp after we get through the planning commission.
If the planning commission puts, I'm looking at letter K, if they put conditions on a preliminary approval, those conditions must be met prior to application for final approval. Does any of that go back to the planning commission, or no, that is just at town?
No, that would go to the planner as final. And those conditions do have to be supported, and there needs to be a basis for it in the code. So yeah. Now all of that said, by the time it gets to the planning commission for approval, you're going to be looking at, they need to have gotten all the sign-offs, like we were talking about with fire. All of that stuff is going to be resolved by the time you have an application in front of you that is entitled to approval. So, you know, there's, and that is going to be, you know, the heavy lift on that is going to be staff, you know, engineer and planner to get that and check off on all of those and, you know, herd the cats into getting answers and responses, and then putting it on the developer as much as possible to get the signatures from any third parties that we don't have any control over. So we tried to do that in this process, that it's the applicant has to submit the letters and those kinds of things as much as possible. So that is through the vast majority of the revisions. There are some comments. The most of the rest of the changes or of the text that is in your packet actually is just reiterating that what the final plat has to include everything that preliminary did. And because we've moved everything to preliminary, it is really going to be basically the same. When we get to final plat procedures, page 45 out of 49 in this portion of the packet, that is just reiterating the change from it going to planning commission and council and going to the planner as dictated there. And it does put the burden on the town planner as the final approval to coordinate with the other parties. And then the last change on the very last page that I did want to talk about is one of the changes in HB 476 is a clarification, and I think it was already basically built in maybe not in Utah code, but in general land use law, that now a town cannot consider applications and development and properties outside of an application that's in front of it. So when you have an application come in, you can't say, well, we know that there's a bigger development going up down the street, so we're going to hold off on this one and not approve it because we can't account for these other things. Unless it is part of a phased development, and that is identified in a development agreement. So I added that language in at 11.08.10, which is a new section entirely that just says, if you have phases, if you own multiple parcels and you want to develop it in phases, you have to have a development agreement with the town so that the town has control over, engaging in that and how it's going to look, so that the town can consider the broader development within the scope of Utah law. So that puts a burden on the town attorney and planner to do that, but it protects the town from, these a developer coming in and basically saying, well, we have 21 units and that means that we need 2 access points, but we're gonna have a second access point when we build phase 2. Well, there's no guarantee that phase 2 happens unless there's a development agreement that we can do something with. But basically, if they can't satisfy it independently of anything else, then they're not entitled to approval. So if they want to use, if they want to say, one of the most common is, well, we want open space to come later because we want to get houses on the ground. And we'll meet the open space requirement in phase 7, and then phase 7 never happens, or it happens 50 years from now or whatever. We don't want to open the door to that more than we have to. So this is saying, if you can't promise us as just part of an application to wait and waive some requirement. It's really already in there. I mean, I don't think that you should be considering those things outside of a binding agreement anyway, but this just puts it in there that that's the expectation.
Jay, we have let's assume a hypothetical scenario. Say we have a subdivision that received a large subdivision that received preliminary approval a year ago, and it's a 7-phased subdivision, and they're on phase 2 right now. They come in on February 1st of 25. Can we enter into that MDA with them to ensure that we know what we're going to get on phases 2 through 7?
Yeah, so this is that might be something hypothetically that needs some more diving in with with the town attorney, because entitlements are specific to individual applications. Some developers will take the position that once they have any approval, they're entitled to everything based on the code that was in effect then. The more conservative approach is, if you have preliminary approval, but it doesn't identify the types of units, the zoning can still change. But if you don't have a development agreement, it only goes for, what was actually approved. So I think you could, but it would probably require some more work with the town attorney to get there. And I would anticipate that there will be a fight and they will have an attorney on the other side.
Absolutely.
So that is the bulk of the changes. What I referenced at the beginning about Title 12 is I want a little bit more feedback from specifically Polly on how phasing is going to be addressed, just so that if everything goes as is, as it's drafted right now, I don't think there are any changes that need to be made in Title 12. If there are nuances to how phasing is addressed in Hideout that I haven't accounted for, we might need to make some changes in Title 12. But the other thing is, I'm also recommending generally, and this is outside of the scope of what I'm able to use the state funding for, but that the town looks at the zoning code, just because that's where really the prohibitions that the town has and what it can do to control development is in the zoning, more so than the subdivision code. So that is the short version for everyone. I'm happy to take any questions. It sounds like what we are looking to do is give the planning commissioners a little bit more time to digest everything that's here. And then I would work with Thomas and Polly on any subsequent red lines, and bring those back for another meeting. We have noticed this for a public hearing. I think it would be appropriate to continue with that, but that is up to you. And then we can address and incorporate any of that feedback into the next round before the planning commission action. We can also, because we aren't subject to the new requirements, and this isn't an individual subdivision, we can take comments now and continue the public hearing to take any additional comments on the changes that we come back. When we come back, I would anticipate that we're just taking questions and identifying the high level of what we might have changed between now and then.
So do we have a timeline of when this will take effect?
In terms once it's adopted, it would take effect upon posting, unless there was a specific date. So the town could decide to make it effective December 31st. But it would be the town council can't act on it until the planning commission makes a recommendation. So
I also had a question. So does this, I guess what I'm trying to say, if we already have had public hearings in the past about, it's certain developments going on and subdivisions that are maybe happening within the town. As far as the public comments, are we starting then new and when this takes effect?
So anything that's already vested, anything that's already come to the town is going to proceed forward under what was in place before.
Okay,
So
thank you. So it's grandfathered in, basically. Okay.
Right. The process doesn't change for anything that's already started until it goes into effect.
Okay, thank you.
And then I guess the only last thing I'd say, if Cameron has anything to add, he's been involved in some of the conversations with Polly, but I think that this covers kind of where we're at and what comes next. So
Yeah, and I think you've covered it well, Jay. There's some urgency because we need to get a recommendation to enable the council to pass this before the deadline. That's the timeline to get it done.
And Cameron, that deadline, the council has to vote to adopt prior to December 31st, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yes.
I have a very quick question, if I may.
Of
This
course.
is Alicia. So a lot of this, it sounds like falls back on the town planner. And we don't typically have the town planners sign off on the plats on the Mylar. Is that a box that we should add?
You don't need to. So it's like in a community that has a planning director, they send the letter, but they don't necessarily sign off on that. So I think that's optional,
Okay.
purely discretionary on what the town wants to do.
Just didn't know if it was required, that we definitely would want to add it in here, so.
No, it's not required.
Okay.
And does Polly insist on being the last one to sign plats? I do for my
Yes.
clients.
Yes, she does.
Yeah. So that's another layer of protection. Because if it doesn't have all the signatures and it's recorded, it's illegal. So. Okay.
So so Jay, it sounds like you may be making a few little red line changes. If this comes back to the planning commission on November 21st, is Cameron, will that be enough time? Typically, do we anticipate the council will just need one meeting? Is that enough time for them?
That's a good question. I mean, I think this is pretty close to final, and so we probably ought to start, unless we anticipate some substantive changes, which I don't think there will be. We probably ought to start working with the council so they can become familiar with this, because it will only give them one meeting. It'll just give them the December meeting to, unless they want to set, a special meeting, which is not ideal in December, probably.
Yeah. I am sensitive to that myself. So, yeah, we can send them this draft, and basically what I would anticipate is an update, possibly, whether it's it will certainly go with the working group, Thomas and Polly and me, and Alicia is helping coordinate a lot of that. And then if it's, I think maybe next week, after I get a chance to talk with Polly, we work out a couple of things and send any comments that we have at this point, even though it's not a official recommendation, to the council so that they can start getting familiar. I think that makes sense to me.
I think that'll be important. So if the planning commission makes a final recommendation on the 21st, at least the council can hear it in November as a work session just to familiarize, so that once the recommendation comes through from planning commission in December, council can vote. Is that they only need one meeting to do the vote, right? Okay.
Yeah, and they don't have to have a public hearing. They may, but the required public hearing for land use ordinance is now or next meeting or both.
Yeah, and we noticed it as a public hearing as well for council. So.
Okay.
For the November meeting or the next?
Yes.
Okay.
So if they were to just table that should be just fine.
Okay.
So I think, Mr. Chairman, I think we need to open this up for public.
Yes. This, we will now open this in regard, open it up for public comment. For anyone that's there that would like to make a comment on this, please step up to the podium. State your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes. Same will be for anybody who's online.
The ordinance and stuff.
Yeah, no, sure, it's not.
Okay.
That's all
I mean,
right.
if you're,
You don't wanna-
want to make
no,
a
no.
comment, you are welcome to. I don't think we have any other people but staff.
Okay, there being no public comment, we will close the public comment portion of this in regard to the ordinance. And that being said, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn this for future consideration to a date certain?
So we'd be continuing this to November 20.
November 21st is the next meeting.
I move that we continue it to a date certain of November 21st
That's 60.
at 6 p.m.
I will second.
Thank you, and we'll take a vote. Joel,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes,
Rachel,
Yes.
Chase,
Yes, sorry, on mute. Yep.
and Tony's a yes. Therefore, it'll be adjourned to November 21st, 2024. Thank you very much, Jay. Next item on the agenda, we'll go to number 4, discussion and possible recommendation for the final subdivision approval for Shoreline Phase 4. The petitioner has requested this be postponed to a date certain. It is on for public comment, so we will open it up for public comment now. If anyone has anything they would like to say in regard to Shoreline Phase 4 subdivision, please step up to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes. Alicia, is there anybody online that has their hand raised?
No, there is not.
Okay, then we will close the public discussion on Shoreline Phase 4 subdivision. And would anyone like to make a motion in regard to that? To continue it to a date certain.
I
I'll
move that
make a
we.
motion. Yep, I'll make a motion to continue the discussion about shoreline subdivision to a date uncertain.
To a date certain.
Date
Date
certain, I'm sorry,
which would be November 21st.
November 21st.
At 6 p.m.
I'll
Thank you
second.
very much, Donna. Okay, we'll take a vote on that. Joel,
Yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes,
Chase,
Yes.
and Tony's a yes. Therefore, Shoreline Phase 4 will be continued to a date certain of November 21, 2024. Last item on the list, discussion regarding an amendment for Wild Horse Development to change the zoning from mountain zone to neighborhood mixed use. Okay, I believe, Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, they have asked for an adjournment on this.
They've asked for a continuation. They're still working through some issues, so they're asking to be continued to a date.
Okay, it is open for public comment, and I assume there are some people there that would like to speak in behalf of this. So if you would just step up to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have your 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, my name is, I don't know where to look.
You can either look there
Okay.
or.
My name is Bill Wolf, and I reside at 500 East Highway 248 in Hideout, Utah. And I would like to express my appreciation to Mr. Chairman about giving me this opportunity from hearing the presentation last week and then allowing me to publicly comment on it this week. I only have 3 minutes, so I'm gonna go fairly quick here. And I know that there's gonna be more additional planning commission meetings and city council meetings, but I wanted to make a couple of comments. And just in my background, I've lived here since 1999. I was the only resident on the whole lake. I've seen all the development and all the neighborhoods go, and I'm actually pro-development. I am a developer builder myself. But when this landed on my doorstep, this commercial rezoning, I felt like I had to speak up. Not the kind of developments that I'm in favor for. In fact, the neighborhood I live in, which adjoins the claim as well, it's very peaceful. We walk our dogs, we get along well. It's got a beautiful view, and we feel that this is very disruptive. I don't speak for people in the claim. I've spoken to them. I haven't spoken to one who is for this. There may be some that are for this, but everyone I've spoken to is against this. But that's up to them to protest. I have to do my own. So I just wanted to say quickly that when I bought my property in 99, I put a height restriction on that lot. So they cannot build anything over 20 feet. And that's part of why they probably have this continuance. In fact, I met with Tim on a Zoom call this morning with his head designer and went over all these issues. And, they just have to redesign what they're trying to do. But I think more importantly, that we feel that it needs to be denied across the board. And for some of the reasons is that, everyone talks about the visibility and the height, but additionally, it's a huge nuisance for us. And, Utah code allows for an action to be brought by a person whose property is injuriously affected or whose personal enjoyment is lessened by the nuisance. And I figure there's 3 nuisances here that I'd like to quickly talk about. It's the odors from the kitchens, the noise. I only have 30 seconds. And, but I'm gonna be putting this into a lot of formal writings as well for everyone to review. By just trying to plant a seed that this is not a good plan for various reasons, which I will be able to enumerate in great depth and detail through writings and through subsequent meetings. I would like you to start considering other options. There's plenty of other places for commercial that will hopefully appear. We have, developments over in Mayflower. It's gonna be a little park city with plenty of restaurants and everything else. 90,000 restaurants closed during COVID. I don't think it's feasible even. I don't think they do either because they don't even have a real, after this morning, I couldn't even tell what they're gonna do with it. Anyway, my 3 minutes are up. I appreciate at least a bit of time to break the ice with you and present my initial thoughts. And I hope this discussion will continue. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else that's present that would like to make a comment?
I'm in here.
Alicia, is there anybody online?
I don't see any hands up.
Okay. That being said, then we will close the public discussion in regard to item number 3 on the agenda, the rezoning of Wild Horse Development. That being said, that takes care of all the items that are on the list for tonight. Thomas, I do have one question before we adjourn. What's the status of Ty's project?
So I actually left a message with Ty today, so I suspect that he will try to pull the details of his concept plan together. He had some additional detailed information that you all have requested and that are required as part of the ordinance. I suspect he'll pull that together and that we'll probably see him in November, or it may be December. I'm not sure, but I think he'll be coming back as quickly as he can pull his information together.
You're muted, Tony.
Tony, you're muted. You got mute.
Sorry about that. Does anybody on the commission have a motion to make now?
I move that we adjourn.
Do I get a thank you, and we'll take a vote. Joel,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
Chase,
Yes.
and Tony's a yes. Thank you all. Sorry for all the noise in the background from where I am.
Keep your kids
We'll
under
see.
control.
We'll see you all in November.
Okay.
All right. Thank
Have a good
you.
night.
Thank-
Good night. From New Jersey.
Hey. Oh, Jersey.
Jersey.
Crazy.
Cherry